Well, hello. Today I wanted to talk about my biggest mistakes that I made as a beginner backpacker. And I have three of them, and I'm going to go in order from least embarrassing to most embarrassing to kind of build myself up for this because there's some things that I don't think I've ever really told anybody, or at least was very hesitant to tell people until now. And mainly I'm thinking about this again, like I really should have kind of come clean about it because maybe other people could learn from my mistakes. So without further ado, my first mistake that I made as a beginner backpacker was not bringing warm enough gear for the climates that I was sleeping in. So that goes for both clothing and actual bedding. So I started doing winter backpacking pretty early on in my backpacking foray because, COVID was still going on. And so one of the few activities that I could do was hiking and camping. So I had to kind of get myself ready to do that activity in those temperatures. I live in New England and it can get really cold in the wintertime. So I would consider really cold to be anything below freezing, but definitely as you get more toward the single digits. But the gear that I had that I started out with was more 3-season gear. So I was not totally prepared for winter conditions. So first of all, for my clothing, I had pretty decent base layers. I had pretty decent shell layers, but I didn't really have a good sort of middle layer, meaning that my puffy, it was more of a 3-season puffy, and it really was not rated for winter at all. And I think that didn't occur to me, like that there would be different sort of temperature ratings on something like a puffy coat. So it was very thin and it just was not sufficient for getting down into the teens and 20s. So I had some cold nights at camp where even if there was a fire, I was still cold because I just didn't have the right insulating layers for camp. But the thing that I did right was I eventually purchased better mid layers. So I got a thicker winter puffy that would take me comfortably down into 0 degrees. And I had to kind of search around because places don't normally just sell like a deep winter puffy. I ended up finding a Columbia one, which I haven't honestly needed that much. I have taken it on a couple trips, but I haven't done a lot of super cold winter backpacking trips in a while. And I'm hoping to change that pretty soon. The other thing that I actually invested in was a pair of down pants. I bought sort of a cheapish pair on Amazon, but those pants were a game changer. All of a sudden now I was able to camp at 0 degrees and not feel cold because I actually had something insulating my legs for a change. And that's definitely something that I recommend if you're going to be camping, anything below freezing. For my bedding, I was pretty set with my hammock, but I did a trip. It was my first sort of winterish backpacking season that I did. And I was camping with somebody in a shelter. And so I brought along a sleeping pad, and what I didn't realize was the sleeping pad that I had was not insulated. And I was really cold that night. I think it got into the 20s. And I just, no matter what, like the pad would not warm up because it didn't have that sort of insulating layer inside of it to reflect your heat. It was basically just plastic and air, which was cold air. So what I ended up doing was the person I was camped with had given me his puffy coat to sleep on top of, and that at least sort of got me through the night. But yeah, that was not the most comfortable sleep. So my second big mistake that I made as a beginner backpacker didn't really happen on a backpacking trip, but it could have. So what happened was I was doing a day hike, actually of the Wapak Trail. And so the plan was to hike the northern half of the Wapak Trail, which is a long distance trail in southern New Hampshire. The whole thing is only about 20 miles, so we were just doing a 10-mile section of it. So we had parked my car at the southern end where we would be ending, which was in Sharon. And then we drove Sean's car up to the northern terminus, and we parked his car there and we started our hike. Well, totally did not realize it until we got back to my car 10 miles later, but I had left my car key in his car. So we basically had no way to get in my car. Thankfully, I did have service, and he was able to text his buddy to pick us up. So lesson learned, if you're doing some sort of car swap where you have one car at one end and one at the other end, make sure both people have their car keys before you lock up the car before you start hiking, because like a second of just checking to make sure that key is there is definitely worth a lot of time and energy of trying to track down a ride. But these things do happen, and if it wasn't that you locked your key in your car, what if, one of the cars didn't start or something? And for that, it's a good idea to carry some sort of backup plan, like a communication device, your phone if you are certain that you'll have service, or a satellite communicator, something where you could call for help just in case something like that happens. Because I know there have been times where people have been out in the whites and maybe they come down the wrong trailhead and they're not at their car, and so they've had to kind of get help, but there's no service, so they end up walking long distances or trying to hitch or flag someone down. But just having sort of that peace of mind of a communication device in case you need to contact somebody for help is really key. Okay, so my most embarrassing mistake that I made as a beginner backpacker, I've actually kind of blocked this out of my memory because I just don't talk about it because I am so ashamed that this happened. But I'm sure someone else at some point has done this stupid thing that I did, and I would never do this ever again. This was a newbie mistake that I just wasn't even thinking. So what happened was actually the same trip where I brought the sleeping pad that was too cold. I brought my alcohol stove, and so it was like, in the 20s in that shelter. It was pretty cold. So I sat on my sleeping pad, and I had my stove. I don't remember what I was making, but I apparently didn't use enough fuel to get the boil that I wanted. And I kind of realized that, and I was like, well, I'll just add more fuel. No, don't do that. Don't ever do that when the stove is lit. Because wherever your fuel goes, the fire goes. And so what happened was flames burst out of the stove and got on my sleeping pad and popped it. So it could have been a lot worse. It could have been a lot worse. But so what happened was I had like a $half size hole in the sleeping pad. So I was like, shit, I am not going to be able to get through tonight because my sleeping pad now has a hole in it, and that was the one thing that I had to keep me insulated from the ground. Of course, now I know it wouldn't have been enough anyway, but here's the thing I did right. So I, as a beginner backpacker, of course, prepared, and I had a little mini repair kit that I put together, and that included a small patch that you would use to repair an air mattress, and it just so happened to be the perfect size to cover this hole with the little extra to make sure that it stayed on. So I used that. I reinflated the pad, and the pad miraculously held throughout the night. And not only that, but I used that same pad on my trip to England and Scotland last summer, and it lasted more than 2 weeks. And as far as I know, would still last today, just with that one patch. So it always bring a repair kit, even if it's just a square of like gear aid or whatever you have, because it could save your trip. It could honestly, it weighs nothing, but it could save your trip. So highly recommend that. So that was a little hard to talk about. Let me know in the comments if you have any big mistakes that you made as a beginner backpacker. Hopefully these are useful to people and you can learn from my dumb mistakes so you don't make the same ones. But just remember, everyone makes mistakes, and that's how you learn. So when you go out there, you're gonna make a bunch of embarrassing mistakes, and it's okay. As long as no one gets hurt, just take what you learned and go with it. So thank you so much for watching, and happy trails.